Rudyard Lynch, welcome back to Dad Saves America.
Hi, it's a pleasure to be here as always.
It has been about a year and a half, I think, roughly, since you were last here, and you were all over the internet at the time proclaiming the pending civil war. Now, if you look on the news and obsess about Minnesota, one could say maybe you were a little early. But what's your take? Are we in a civil war now? Was that prediction maybe a little too hyperbolic? How have you shifted in your thinking on the American Civil War circumstances?
I stand by my older prediction, and I think it's still going to happen. I'm not going to give out a date soon because I've been wrong the previous time. But all of the variables that I said, I still stand by because the situation has not fundamentally changed.
Let's recap those for those who haven't seen the first. What was the original thesis?
I had studied about four different eras of history that have parallels to ours. And so I compared them and I looked at a variety of historic cycles for when revolutions happen. And from adding all of that together, I predicted America would have a civil war comparable to like the English Civil War, the American Civil War, or the French Revolution, and the fall of the Roman Republic, to say the fourth one. And these are consistent threads we see pop up again and again over history.
So what are some of those threads? Because one of the things that since we last saw each other that I've spent more time thinking about and reading about is the French Revolution. And to me, it seems like we are closer to a French Revolution type of cultural problems than, say, the American Revolution seems kind of almost an oddball. It is almost not a revolution. It was more like a skirmish that preserved the existing order, whereas like the French Revolution was like, let's overturn everything. Let's turn Notre Dame into the Tower of Reason or whatever.
Yeah.
What do you agree? Do you think that that's more like where we're at?
A very important thing I've learned in the last few years is that the ideology of the French Revolution is the same ideology or really religion of the current crisis. And I just discovered one of my favorite new historians who's a Catholic historian named Chris Dawson. And so he rewrites all of world history through the lens of sort of Catholic apologia, but he's very good about it, where he puts it in a Catholic frame, but he's not propagandistic about it. And so he has a book called The Gods of the Revolution, looking at these different ideologies from the Enlightenment forward. And so he says that the French Revolution was a sort, and de Tocqueville says this too, it was a sort of new religion that had specific precepts. And a lot of people like to blame the leftism on the Jews, but when you go back to the first generation of thinkers, they were by and large Frenchmen in the 18th century. And so Saint Simon is a great example. He was a thinker who said, in 18th century France, we need to get rid of sort of normal human things like masculine and feminine or ethnicity or social class and replace them with a new man. He talks about ideas that sound very similar to trans. He said, or his buddies in his sort of social cohort said, we need to import migrants from the third world to destroy the first world in the early 19th century. And they talked about making a new priesthood of the science and priesthood of rationality, where they have scientific materialist rituals. And so if you were to go back to the French Revolution, it's an ideology that in many ways is very similar to the current one. It's just they keep on rehashing it as new.
Okay, I'll keep this quick. Be sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so that you won't miss more Dad Saves America as our videos come out each week. And it also really helps us because when we reach out to guests, they look at how many subscribers there are to decide if they want to come on and share their ideas. So please subscribe to the channel. It really helps us out. And thanks for watching. Now, back to the show.
It's funny because I just came across his name for the first time because I was trying to understand, like, how far back does the idea of global government go?
Yeah.
And I think I asked like Gemini or something. I spawn all the robots to do research and then compare their outputs and then try to verify that they're not making stuff up. And he came up as one of the earliest globalists. And then I think he had, his name is escaping me now. Is it Comte? I forget. But he had a disciple that is considered the father of sociology. Are you familiar with this guy? He was similar.
There's multiple people who are called the father of sociology: Durkheim, Max Weber. There was probably French guys.
Yeah, but he was also similarly like a kind of global utopian, blank slate Jacobin kind of guy.
Yeah.
You mentioned that there's a notion that leftism comes from the Jews. What is that? Because I obviously we're not going to go into some rabbit hole about all of the factionalism on the right, but I have found, as somebody who's I like Judaism. I have close Jewish friends. I came out of New York and entertainment, so that's kind of par for the course in a certain sense. But I find the kind of like blame the Jews for everything stuff that's going on right now to be pretty scary. What's your understanding of that narrative? Like,
I agree. I've come to see anti-Semitism more as like a biological switch where it fills a very primal archetypal function inside the human mind that once the switch gets hit, basically people suspend rationality. And that doesn't say, if you want to push back, every evolutionary switch involves growing up in a certain context where certain things are justified and other things are not justified. I don't want to look at that angle for it. But it's clear that this takes a very deep part of people's psyche. And the thing that I was just writing about the political shifts of the last few years, because I was trying to rewrite what was it like for me to perceive how the internet's changed in the time since Elon bought Twitter. Mm-hmm. And the thing that really struck out to me as I was writing, and I had to add an extra chapter in because I thought, I'll just talk the Israel-Gaza conflict as a side theater. And I thought, wait, this was the dominant political current of a 2-year period. Mm-hmm. And I had never processed it because I largely do not care about this conflict. It's entirety of Israel is the size of New Jersey, and Gaza is the size of Cape May. And Gaza is smaller than Chester County. And by a significant margin.
These are shared Collar County, Philadelphia roots that you understand.
Yes.
I understand.
Yes. And so I'm Celtic, and I know how honor disputes work. And this is so clearly to me a sort of like hereditary honor dispute, like North and South Ireland. And no one looks at North and South Ireland and thinks, oh, what if we just dropped UN peacekeepers to stop this 400-year-old blood feud? That would just be seen as staggeringly delusional. But also, I can look at the Israel war conflict and think, none of the people involved are my kin. This is a different continent. I am not part of this honor dispute, and I am grateful for that. And then I see everyone else hobble onto this sort of like clan honor dispute to pick like the morally right and wrong faction. I thought, that's not what this is about. The people in the Middle East do not share this frame with you. But it really struck me that the Israel-Gaza conflict, it was basically used to invalidate sort of public figures, where everyone had their position, are you for or against it? And it's crazy that it was used to sort of divide up the public. And furthermore, we wasted 2 years of what could have been valuable discourse on this. We could have talked about the demographic issues or the economic issues, about the mental health crisis, China, and yet we chose to talk about a country the size of New Jersey and its war in an area the size of Cape May.
Well, and I know it's always a little bit like there's multiple conversations going on, although frankly, all the issues you talked about don't get enough airtime or consideration to be. So I think you're right in principle. It is also strange and seems almost on purpose that you have sort of Trump come in and be reelected with a lot of energy behind him and what should be functionally like a unified American right behind this in an interesting way. And then this issue, which had been sort of festering on the like omni ideology intersectional left, where it's like, oh, well, the Jews are rich, therefore they're oppressors, and now we can just all be whatever. They're whatever that blob, sticky thing they have that attaches everything to everything else. it comes back on the right now in the past year in particular, and just creates even more splintering. So how do you understand why that is? Not again, like the particular players, Candace, Fuentes, are kind of less interesting. That's all. They're all varying flavors of shock jock.
Yeah.
So the fact that we have spent so much time in like serious political environments talking about them is kind of goofy. It's like obsessing about Howard Stern in the 90s when considering whether NAFTA should be passed. It's like,
yeah.
But like it does seem deeper. How do you think about that?
That's a good point, or a good question, and I'll say two things. The first is I think this is a way to avoid responsibility or seriousness. I think the public is actively picking issues where they won't have to look at their own problems. And I think Israel is a useful psychological projection because it's sort of so religiously and culturally loaded, but it's also totally away from any of our issues. So everyone can point at it and say, this is what we care about. And that can allow them to abdicate responsibility over their own country and their own lives. And I've said before that the core of leftism is the abdication of responsibility. And because the left has controlled all of our institutions of basically teaching people and cultivating them, you end up with this hyper-leftist victim narrative that spills into the right. And this is one of the things I really hate about. I've been thinking a lot about the different parts of the right, and the two elements I think are really holding the right back now are the boomer cons and the sort of like degenerate online Zoomers. And I think these two demographics are bad in different ways. The boomer cons are sort of complacent and willing to see their society die if they can still take in the six-figure check. And they're blind to the issues. Well, the degenerate Zoomer cons, they just try to attack anyone who actually tries to solve the problems. They focus on silly things. And the only thing they really care about is the most petty and stupid status games.
Hanging out with looks maxers, etc.
Yeah, I was talking with my dad. What would my great grandpa who grew up in the Irish ghetto think about looks maxing if he heard about it? He guarded German POWs in World War I. If you talk to this guy about looks maxing, what would his reaction be?
Let's think about that for a second. Did you play it out? What do you think it would be?
So I talked to my dad, and we inherited 2 cudgels from this guy because he was a policeman, and so he passed on 2 giant cudgels.
Oh, the literal cudgels.
Yes,
not cudgel as a kind of use like a rhetorical term.
No, because he was a policeman, so he kept cudgels in the house, and he didn't have a shillelagh though, which is a failure for an Irish family. But he had a policeman's billy club, and then he had his own personal billy club, so he could beat you up in your free time and his work time. And
no school like the old school.
My dad just listed expletives as his response.
Sounds about right. That's, well, we both have our heritages are both sort of filled with expletives. Mine being Southern Italy and yours being Irish. So it's like we're both like the people that came to America or our great grandparents were treated terribly, eventually found a place, and never lost the potty mouth.
Yeah,
even in polite company. Well, so there in a way, it seems like there are kind of mini civil wars happening in our culture and our discourse. But how does that, to come back to my original question about like, where are we in your original thesis of a bigger civil war, like a real one? Is that part of what's feeding this? What's your, why do you think it's still happening, but hasn't yet happened yet? And have you updated the way you think this would happen actually? Is it like states versus the federal government like we're seeing in Minnesota? That seems like the hints of something plausible and not great.
In my earlier predictions, I had divided this between the 2 different crises of the Mouse Utopia biological crisis versus the political crisis of the Civil War. And I had spoken of an event called the psychological Black Death. And so it's similar to the crisis of the 14th century, where you had the 100 Years' War, the Guelphs and the Ghibellines, and the Battle of Nicopolis, where you have these countries having civil wars and political crises, but the Black Death is a facilitating factor.
Is this pardon my bad history, is this the war that ends with the Treaty of Westphalia?
That's the 30 Years' War.
Okay.
The 100 Years' War was the one that ended with Joan of Arc.
Ah, okay.
And so the facilitating factor for the crisis of the 14th century is the Black Death, which was a disease that killed half of Europe's population. And so for me, I was always torn between, does Mouse Utopia hit first, or does the political crisis hit first? And my assumption was always that the political crisis would hit first, because I did not think that this sort of level of denial was possible. And I've been studying Nietzsche's Age of the Last Men lately, and that's been the key variable that sort of had a lot of this locked into my mind. But I think we're basically seeing internet-based psychological degeneration and atomization hit as the first layer, and that's delaying political crises. The underlying political issues are still there. I think sort of Mouse Utopia is delaying this, though.
So Mouse Utopia being this sort of confined, bizarre psychopathology that happens in mice when you put them all together and they breed like crazy, right?
Yeah.
Why would that be? What does that mean, though? What does that mean? What does that mean that Mouse Utopia is delaying? Are we just getting caught up in nonsense like looks maxing and stupid weekly news cycles and not looking at stuff like the population collapse or the fiscal death situation, or what?
I want to state this for the people in your audience who don't follow my work, but I say I'm betting against God. That's one of the phrases I used. And what I mean by that is I think foretelling the future is an impossibly difficult task. So I operate in a place where I'll make a probabilistic guess, and then each year I factor in new information into my assessment, and then I rebuild my worldview. So I see the way I view the world as a sort of organic garden that I'll see the plants grow, and then I'll drop some extra fertilizer, I'll cut out this plant if it's not growing right. So when I'm saying these things, I'm forming an idea that I can later work on. And most people sort of put out an idea, say, this is my identity, it's going to be correct. But I don't think that's actually like a fair or a reasonable sort of metric to use as a person. Because if you want to guess the future, you're betting against all of God's creation. And there's always more variables going on. So the reason I'm saying that is 3 variables showed up that I didn't really account for. And the best paradigm that explains all of this is Nietzsche's concept of the Age of the Last Men. You can ask me about that if you'd like.
Yeah.
But those 3 variables are screen addiction, socialism, and Mouse Utopia. And so those are the 3 variables that I think are delaying a political crisis, because it's not like things are getting better. They're in fact getting worse. But people don't have the mental framework on how to deal with it, so they're sort of lost. And I think we're in a state of psychological limbo now.
So let's take each of those 3 in reverse order. So let's start with Mouse Utopia. Give the brief recap of what the Mouse Utopia experiment is and its application to the present.
Mouse Utopia was a series of studies in the 60s and 70s that was meant to assess the effects of overpopulation, because the world's population had tripled in the last century, and probably even more than that. But what happens when you give mice perfect conditions with no external threats, perfect climate, no disease, is the mice breed like crazy. So you start with 9, you end up with 2,000 mice in a cage that could potentially hold over 6,000. What then occurs is a supercharged version of decadence or imperial declines. So without an incentive, the mice stop being able to form relationships. They have what Calhoun calls the first death, or a spiritual death, where they lose their internal monologue. Then the mouse social structure falls apart. Male mice become hyper-feminine. Female mice become hyper-masculine. There's sort of K-pop style beautiful ones of people who are just obsessed with their looks maxing, in fact. And mice lose the ability to maintain relationships where their society falls apart. Some mice become autistic, other mice become hyper-violent, and just every single time the birth rate crashes to zero and the mouse colony totally fails.
So, yeah, there's all kinds of sync with what we've seen in our social order there, right? The feminized men is particularly weird. What's the theory behind that? Why is it just that the male drive to be virile doesn't have an outlet, and so it's like an adaptation to the new circumstances of comfort? Like, what have you've spent a lot of time on this, looking at this Mouse Utopia experiments. What's the causal reason for suddenly, like in Japan, like young men are sometimes buying bras and they're not even saying I'm a girl. It's just weirdo stuff. Totally weird. Like, for the mice though, what's the reason for the mice?
I'm thinking it through. So first of all, there's a removal of external threats. And then secondly, in mating rituals, purposeful inefficiency is good, which is why guys buy expensive cars or watches.
Conspicuous consumption.
Yes.
Just look at me, I'm high status, I have all this stuff I don't need.
And so certain mating rituals devolve into purposely ineffective antisocial behaviors as a flex. No, I'm completely serious. And so
that makes sense.
When you end up in a dynamic like that with also crowd psychology, that crowds take on sort of lower level psychological attributes and then magnify them. So when you're combining no external threats with doing the opposite of something being attractive, and then crowd psychology, is that for people without a lot of independence, they sort of get stuck in these psychological crowd games where they're confusing sort of a crowd, something that signals well to the crowd, with actual behaviors. A lot of the left was a psyop made by communists, which sounds like a conservative conspiracy theory, but this has been studied and completely bookended. But these things that started out as communist political strategies are now people's unironic beliefs.
You mean like queer theory?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That started out as a cynical move by the Marxists to destroy the society and the family. And now plenty of teenage to young women actually believe this is their real identity.
I think of it like we just finished the second season of Landman, and there's this great scene in it where the beautiful daughter goes to the university and she meets her roommate, and her roommate is like a copy and paste Tumblr Blue Sky or avatar, they, them with a ferret, androgynous, and as the plot progresses, you see they actually kind of end up becoming friends. But the snapshot of that, where and the bookend of where are you from, Minneapolis, is so perfect. So that's all adopting somebody else's psyop as an identity for yourself.
Yeah, and it's really remarkable. And I've been studying crowd psychology a lot. It follows its own logic. But it's really common that sort of a psyop becomes a reality. And our worldview is often Marxist propaganda, where the Marxists made a certain propaganda, and they were quite open about this. You can look at the Soviets talked about all of this. It was released either by defectors like Yuri Bezmenov or after the fall of the Soviet Union. But the Soviets had this down to a science. But then the quote, people the Marxists called useful idiots, they actually believed it and then started implementing it across the society. And
American academics in the 60s, basically.
And the death of God, removed any sort of immunity inside our collective unconscious, where once you remove the divine framework, people can't actually discern the world. I've been coming more and more to think that religion is a biological, organic part of humans' minds, and so removing it basically removes the structure for discernment.
So you've got this Mouse Utopia dynamic, this sort of population comfort, new forms of status seeking that are sort of bizarre biologically, but serve some social purpose, but then become in this mass feedback loop.
Yes.
And then we've shifted now into the sort of the socialism in a sense, which is, okay, then you have these sort of parasitic ideologies. Why is socialism communism? I just say communism because I frankly think that the whole use of socialism is a joke and also a psyop.
Yeah.
It's all just communism. It's all just a single sort of fundamentally like materialist theology that tries to say it's about equality, but it's always just about power.
Yeah.
Is that how you think about it? And like, what is why is socialism one of your three key pillars of this, like the problems we're facing now?
This is why I find Nietzsche's Age of the Last Men so useful, because Nietzsche was writing in the 1880s and he said, no one will actually understand my philosophy till the year 2000. And the reason he said is that in the 21st century, he said after 2 centuries would be a period he called the Age of the Last Men. And the Age of the Last Men would be a society that would glorify mediocrity, complacence, and the West would be dying of nihilism. And he said, during the Age of the Last Men, it would be so sort of sterile and comfort-oriented that you wouldn't be able to cultivate healthy human life. And the society would be based off what he called ressentiment or envy, where he said the Age of the Last Men is a combination of a lot of wealth and comfort. And then in the absence of the death of God, there's no way to justify suffering or exertion. And what fills the void is sort of envy-based socialism, where the aim of the society is sort of cutting people down as this sort of mutual envy herd dynamic. And so it's death of God removes moral framework. You see the rise of sort of socialism and conformist ideologies that fill the void, and then you have the wealth and the comfort. And so Nietzsche said the Age of the Last Men would be the most dangerous era of Western history ever, where the West would be committing suicide due to nihilism. But he says it ultimately is defeated.
What is your understanding of what nihilism is? Like, define nihilism for me? Because it's worth revisiting these basic definitions.
There's a wonderful book called Nihilism by Father Seraphim Rose, who is an Orthodox theologian. And so he goes through how nihilism is imprinted across all of modern society. And you would understand this better because you're Catholic, but so imagine in a sort of a religious worldview, coming from God is sort of, if you submit to God, then it generates new things around you. And so there's this idea that life matters. And because of this core belief that life matters, if I do an act, it sort of generates more for the world. And so it's a sort of emergent order, as you might say. That once you follow these principles, you can trust in the emergent order. Nihilism is the inverse of that. Nihilism is that because things at their core don't matter, my actions don't matter, and thus I should not, it's a variety of things, and I should not be held accountable for the choices I make. No one's better than anyone else. And so if you sort of go through everyone's logic chain, if the end of the logic chain is I can do this because nothing matters, it's nihilism. And what Father Seraphim Rose did so well is he articulates different social institutions where, for art as an example, we make bad art because we don't genuinely value art's potential. For a Christian or other world societies, art is partly a reflection of God's creation. Mm-hmm. And so through God perceiving art, it creates a value for the art that that basically you are making something innately worthwhile that other people will look at and derive value. But if you're nihilistic, the art is supposed to be gross and weird to reflect that.
So that's the specs for the median Netflix TV show.
Yeah.
It doesn't need to be good. It can just be slop. do a bunch of DEI checkbox stuff, make your favorite former character like black and gay, checkbox, move on. It's not art. There's no art part of it, except maybe occasionally the framing is pretty and the lighting looks nice.
And one of the things Nietzsche said that was quite prescient, and I am not a Nietzschean, I don't even really like Nietzsche that much as a philosopher, if I'm honest. I think he just got several things quite correct. So he called the left anti-life. And that's a very prescient thing to say in the 19th century.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And he said that during the age of the last men, the left will metastasize from like supposedly caring about minorities and women and whatever to just being raw anti-nihilism, anti-life. And I think we crossed that threshold where COVID was the last point the left pretended to care about the groups they're helping. I have a term called like the John Oliver SNL America. This like relatively small window when the current ideology of liberal were still the dominant voice of America. And it's disturbing to see that demographic of people devolve from pretending to care about whatever groups they're saying to in reality just supporting the iron boot. Because whenever you look at leftist messaging today, it's basically accept iron boot, you will be poor, don't have kids.
Yes. Oh, and kill your babies.
Yeah.
In fact, that should be like a rite of passage that you, as a woman, kill your baby. Kill a couple babies, and then you can really say you're a woman. I have a friend who's a lawyer. She now runs her own firm. And she said that it was so prevalent among female lawyers to have had an abortion that because she's Catholic, and because she was against that and actually had kids, it was quite literally told to her, like, you're not part of the sisterhood. You know, it's so antithetical to the entire premise of like an organism to be actually in favor of ending your population. It's like the most inorganic thing imaginable. It's like, what do all life forms want to do, right down to deer and insects?
Yeah. Yeah. It's and Nietzsche said that the age of the last men would become a capstone for the future of what to avoid, but not for the reasons people think. So Nietzsche said that there'd be mass tyrannies with the death of God. He said this would be a phase, but then after that phase, the nihilism would creep in. And he said what was insidious at the age of the last men is sort of how passively evil it is. I have a difference in passive evil and active evil. Active evil is burning villages down and just murdering people. Passive evil is enabling, and it's not doing things when things needed to be done. And he said the age of the last men had become a capstone for basically the evil of decadence. It would be the most personified, it would be like the perfect version of evil decadence. And he said that was something we needed to sort of have in our mental toolkit to avoid, but we didn't have. So he said the age of the last men would be us being forced to learn the lesson of basically that passive evil is just as evil as active evil.
One of the things the description, this Nietzschean description is very frightening in how prescient it is.
Yeah.
But one question I have is, when did this age start from your perspective? Because when you read the Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, which is just, I think, such an important, it's like a cornerstone book for me in my current phase of my life. He talks about, for those who haven't read this book, it's Viktor Frankl. He's a psychologist. He had been through the Holocaust. He documents the experience in this really, like, almost a documentary kind of way. And then the back half is trying to grapple with, why did some people survive and protect their identity and their psychology, and others just give in? And it's quite powerful. A lot of good stuff for today. But one of the things he notes that just struck me is the nihilism of youth in the 1950s.
Yeah.
Because of the comfort. And he sounds like he's describing 2026, but he's describing the nihilism and the lost boys-ness of the 1950s.
Yeah.
So when did the age of the last men start? Is it in the 21st century, or is it much earlier than that?
I've been thinking about that because I've been wanting to make a History 102 video, which is my second podcast, I'd recommend it above my first, actually. Because I made a podcast in the 1950s, and the thesis I had is you can't really perceive the 1950s as a conservative decade. It was progressive compared to everything before. And if you actually go back, this is a society with socialism, a 90% tax rate. It's got feminism. It's overwhelmingly, people sort of went to church, but there was no actual sort of like spiritual belief underlying it.
It was like a cut flower society.
Yeah, very well put. And it's a gradual thing. I've developed a term called plastopia. And plastopia is sort of the plastic utopia we thought we had in the post-World War II era. And then, so...
It's kind of like The Graduate. Did you see that movie,
No.
The Graduate? Oh, sort of classic 1970s, Dustin Hoffman at the... It's like loaded with this sort of 60s critique of American culture, and one of the moments is he's graduated from, basically the thing is he's graduated from school, and what's he going to do, and life feels meaningless, and he's like in a bourgeois family, and he's at, if I remember this correctly, it's been a while, he's at like a dinner party or something, and he meets like one of his father's friends, and he's like, son, you should get into plastics. And it's meant to be, I think, a metaphor that the whole society is basically just plastic.
Yeah. And so the thing at the Age of the Last Men is I want to make a video in the future, line go up, line go down. 20th century is line go up. We are entering line go down.
You mean materially? Or just along a lot of dimensions?
Demographically, materially, socially.
Psychologically.
Yeah, and so the turn from line go up to line go down is scary, but it's ultimately just a moment in time. So if we accept that this is just a moment of time, we can maintain sanity and not take it too seriously. But the start of the Age of the Last Men is World War I. And a lot of this stuff is sort of trauma reaction to World War I, where everything, because people talk about the Holocaust and World War II. I think that's genuinely valid as a sort of, we are reacting against that. I think what we're reacting against even more is World War I, where you saw these sort of traditional, heroic, masculine monarchies fight this epic sort of Lord of the Rings-esque conflict over these old European countries, but it was done in the most horrifying ways possible, with trenches that looked like Mordor, days at the Somme with trench feet. And so when you're looking at everything our society is built about, it's sort of, we want to reject everything that went into World War I. And so we've been trying to reject their concepts of heroism or colonialism or earnestness or the idea that science can genuinely model the human condition. And so we've doubled down on a lot of unhealthy traits due to that. But where I think the Age of the Last Men really set in was the 60s, with the removal of all the standards. And the time it flipped from sort of line go up to line go down is 2008, where, because so line go up, line go down is like a singular process. But at the same time, it's because you have, when you look at sort of the society that led to the current Mouse Utopia, it has a lot of the same traits, but it was perceived in a very different light because it was seen as part of the prosperity. So it's the same process, it just looks very different from different sides of the mountain. Because once you get to the top of the mountain, you see the way down. It totally changes the ascent, if that makes sense.
Is it, it's funny for you to bring up World War I because I come back to that period quite a bit because for a bunch of reasons that are sort of just my own nerd path.
Yeah.
Woodrow Wilson and 1913 and this sort of like, and I've been reading more and more about this, revisiting his like notion of scientific administration. And I feel like he is the first full instantiation of that French Jacobin ideology. Like we have the science now. Most of the public are actually rubes. So what we really need to do, with the help of my buddy Walter Lippmann and then Edward Bernays, is manage people's perception of reality so that their choice set is narrow, because they're basically wild animals and imbeciles. So democracy in any form is sort of a joke. We just need to manage the public. We need to have a global government structure. So he creates the League of Nations in the aftermath of World War I. And so it seems like that, like World War I is like the crisis opportunity for the kind of technocratic global WEF elite to be birthed by that group, by Wilson, Lippmann, George Bernard Shaw, H.G. Wells. That whole group sort of says, like, this is our time to use science.
Yeah.
Trust the science, including eugenics, which we all really like. And like that's kind of, so I've been, is that part of that? Is that part of your model of what happened in that moment?
Yeah, no, you totally nailed that. You did a great job explaining it. That's what I would have said. It's that generation, and it's Wilson, Bernays. In progressivism meant a different thing back then. It means the same thing but different. I'm guessing you're getting the argument from Soul.
And a bunch of sources, but sure, yeah, for sure.
Soul talks about that really well.
Yeah, the unconstrained vision of man, the sort of straight and the crooked arrow.
Yeah. He also he's written about World War I era progressives a lot too. But Edward Bernays he's a sort of interesting figure. And there's a great documentary, Century of the Self.
I've just been watching this, actually.
It's one of the best documentaries of the last few decades, I think.
It's Michael Schellenberger recommended it to me. I'm like into episode 3 so far, because it's older and long, and but so it's also Freud. So you've got this Freud stuff that's all, and he becomes completely despondent about mankind. And so bring us back. So you've got this Age of the Last Man starts with like the whole vision of the world being smashed by World War I.
Yes.
And then World War II is basically just a kind of echo continuation of World War I, really. It's like sort of we call it like the interwar period between the two.
That's correct. They're sort of different. James Burnham says World War I is the last war of the capitalist order, and World War II is the first war of the managerial order. And you can see that with the regimes that went into World War I were by and large aristocratic parliamentary monarchies. They were the kind of society you could have seen in the Middle Ages. And that order ended with World War I bringing in the managerial society.
The collapse of the Habsburgs.
And I've been looking a lot at sort of mass society. Mass society is the idea that you have media and national institutions where across the country everyone listens to Dolly Parton or the Beatles. They have the same bureaucratic structure. Mm-hmm. And so mass society is, how do you make social institutions for as many people as possible, that once you do that, you establish weird incentives where if you enable the most people as possible, then you hit lowest common denominator as the shared value. And so World War I smashed that open. And you also had to convince these populations to die for their countries. And so it created incentives for sort of social handlers to, first of all, radically manipulate people and tell them things they want to hear. And so that generation of social engineers around the world wars built a pretty inhuman society. And that was something they built through the education system, the architecture, the intellectuals, where in our society, something is only registered as real if the system recognizes that it's real and if the system benefits from it. And so,
what do you mean by the system?
The bureaucratic structure. So truth is orchestrated by the bureaucratic structure in our society. If the bureaucratic machine says something is true, then it's true.
So the New York Times and the deep state, like what do we mean by the bureaucratic structure?
So trans is the best example of this. Same thing as climate change. For trans, the current managerial priest class said that men and women are the same and they can remake reality. Trans people are real people. So they're bludgeoning you over with common. So I find people defer to AIs on the internet a lot. It's weird where they'll just say like Grok is this true, Claude is this true, ChatGPT is this true, because they sort of see it as a machine god. If you had actual rationality, you would be assessing the point you're given through these rationalistic frameworks that Aristotle or Francis Bacon developed. But you're just listening to the machine god because that's how they already think. The system supplies them the truth. I will not analyze this myself through common sense and reason. I will listen to the output the system gives us. And that's how you get people to believe the utter absurdities, where the idea, for example, killing the rich will make us wealthier is so staggeringly insane if you look at common sense. Because who do you think generates the innovations? Who do you think are the people who are running the companies? Where if you want to get a nicer iPhone, then it's not going to be small entrepreneurs who do that. It's it's going to be the wealthy. And so when you believe these strange disjoints where, as an example, if you're from a city like Philadelphia, the idea that all cultures are the same is insane, because I say Philly is 4 different subcultures. You have Northeastern Catholics, Southern Blacks, Midwestern Protestants, and then sort of Northeastern WASPs. And these are all people you will deal with in different ways, but then you can just shove the idea all cultures are the same. And they can believe that because the system tells them to believe it. Because from the system's perspective, all cultures are in fact the same because they're equally exploitable.
The one of the things that I worry about, and I think feeds into the nihilism you're talking about, is the use of this term, the system. So I want to linger on this for a little bit because I know you think about this stuff in a deep way. But a lot of people on the internet, basically every populist in one form or another, some of which I'll agree with more than others, will say that we have a thing called there's the system. And I guess what I want to push on and see how you react to is the way I think about a system, just like kind of technically, is it's actually got cause and effect mechanisms in it that are essentially reproducible. Like, oh, a system, when you push this button here, this light goes on over here.
Yes.
Like the electric grid is an actual system. It's all connected. It's got to run at 60 hertz. It's a system. But when you have sort of this, like, the society, even you have something that we'll say is the system, but it's not really a system in the same way, or maybe it is. And so I want to hear, right? Because it's not. It's like, okay, it seems like it's almost more Marxist. It's like there's like a class culture divide. Like you have a kind of people that go through a certain kind of education and come up together through Yale and Harvard and UPenn and Philly, and they all have this same way. And so their view is very particular, and they end up, there's this like dirty dozen of schools that end up occupying like half of all managerial jobs. So that's not the same thing as like the electric grid, but it maybe is close enough. So, but that's still not the same thing as this. Like, this is where I get a little worried when I hear even my friends say like, we need to burn the system down or smash the system. I'm like, can you be a little more specific?
I think that's a very valid point, because I am talking about something very different from the Marxists. I am pulling this from Bertrand de Juvenal, who is a libertarian philosopher from France a century ago. And he divides society between the society and power. And so power is an established organization where you send out orders, where the government is power, a corporate bureaucracy is power, and then the society is the organic self-organism that it's are you emergent order or are you bureaucratic? Mm-hmm. And so pre-modern political philosophy was all about how do we increase the power of the society versus the power of sort of bureaucracy. Because bureaucracies become sort of cultural dead matter. They're not responsive to their environments. Yeah. And so when you're looking at Aristotle say that a society's natural elites should govern it, what he means by that is that when you have the social organism, people will naturally rise to the top and be widely respected as competent or skilled rather than being chosen by a hierarchical bureaucracy. And this is occupied the minds of philosophers for thousands of years. So I am just dipping my toes in. But when I'm talking about the system, I'm talking about bureaucratic structures that operate under hierarchical rules and sort of pre-established systems that trounce organic emergent order.
One way I think...
I'm going to add something else as well.
Please, keep going.
Where when Marxists talk about capitalism being a system, they're doing psychological projection, where capitalism is an organic phenomena attached to its environment. And as a rule, the more your society's social structure reflects nature or reality, the better it will do. And so the reason capitalism and democracy and science work so well is they have these checking mechanisms of, does this social structure replicate nature? And what Marxism does is it tries to crush nature and control every element of it. So when you're looking, part of the reason that figures like Donald Trump or Elon Musk garner respect from the American public and can lead on the right, while the left can't do that, is because these people have actually gone out into the world and built reputations and status through dealing with the real world. And we can't respect the people who are rewarded according to the system's logic because the system operates under rules that are removed from reality. So the left look at their own people and say that in our own priest structure, this is like a level 12 battle mage. And so we should give them status. But then...
You're talking about Hillary Clinton.
Yes. Hillary Clinton's a level 12 battle mage.
Yeah. But I mean, the real odd one is, it's like that model of selection found its perfect... What was it, like H.L. Mencken said, like eventually democracy will be so perfected that the president will be a complete moron. I'm paraphrasing, but Kamala Harris is the final boss in hierarchy that is based on nothing that could be considered measurable merit.
Yeah, I've considered, if I had extra money or whatever, I've considered doing a media stunt of finding the singular most oppressed person on earth in the left's framework and interviewing them. The Muslim, BIPOC, trans, queer, disabled, autistic person, and see what their actual opinions are.
These often don't go as expected.
Yeah. And it's interesting to see, this is a tangent, but it's a valuable one, how often the left's psychological projections of certain groups are not accurate. They have a sort of very distinct psychology from what the left says. Left's image of black people is not what actual black people are about. They almost always pick a highly assimilated, sort of educated class of black people. But then if you look at black communities like Atlanta or Philadelphia or St. Louis, it's nothing like the left's portrayal of black people. The left has, because they have concerns that are far more like local and reasonable. They, by and large, do not care about the left's social projects. They often see them as abominations. They often are socially conservative. And if you look at the working classes, again, the real working classes had nothing in common with the left's projections. The working classes were not the sort of vanguard of the Marxists. Intellectuals were. The working classes had their own specific sort of more practical interests of, can I get my kids to go to the right school? Is my job going to lay me off? And so when the left did, or when our ruling class did deindustrialization, they were technically saying they were supporting the working class's interests while doing the exact opposite.
Well, the best example of this that comes to my mind is a character like Claudine Gay at Harvard. So she was the president during, at the time of 10-7 and, was brought before the hearings and whatnot. But her backstory is so much more awful. So she's one of these sort of hack. She's literally a hack. She's like a known, proven plagiarist that's published very little actual research. While she was at Harvard, she was all about critical theory nonsense. Meanwhile, she's a silver spoon kid that came from a well-off background, has nothing to do with sort of poor black culture, inner city black culture, any of that stuff. She actively sought to and largely succeeded in trying to destroy Roland Fryer who actually was like a poor black kid that managed against all the odds to become a great, genuine intellectual and a scholar at Harvard.
Yeah.
But so he and his work was pushing back on all of her assumptions, including, for example, the actual stats around police. So some of his work included that the police are actually less likely to use deadly force against a black assailant for the reasons you would expect, which is they know they're going to get in trouble. And actually, like, more than half of all police forces are black, or people of color, black and brown people, non-Caucasians. So she's like the avatar. She's basically like the Woodrow Wilson of our times. Like, she's the avatar of this like fake social signaling race hustler.
Yeah. I've always had a wonder if the reason she got her job is because her last name is gay. So that sounds really superficial and lame.
Oh.
But as we've put together the left psychology, they are in fact profoundly superficial and lame. Look at the culture they produce. I'm just thinking, because they're not deep people. And I'm thinking, no hair, last name gay, black, woke. She is like, if it's like a card game, she's like a clean deck in their weird status games.
Yeah. She's a straight flush.
It's really interesting to look at sort of the left with culture because they're sort of psychologically spilling all their guts, where they have no pushback. So if you look at leftist Hollywood, they'll just say utterly psychologically deranged things that we're just too numb to notice, where the subtext behind all of the recent Hollywood is these are just profoundly petty people, and they're profoundly pathetic, where they always have to have the old white guy get emasculated. They can't write real characters. There's no sense of depth or purpose. And it really reminds me of C.S. Lewis's quote that if you want to be original, tell the truth. And if you try to be original, you'll be like everyone else who's trying to be original. And it's just disturbing that these people of cultural authority.
One of the things that I think the moment we are in now, especially sort of in the aftermath of 2024 and the Trump assassination attempt and all the big voices coming out and him getting reelected, and like the sort of full realization of like Elon's X, is we have a moment where we can have the kind of conversation we're having and say things that you didn't used to be able to say.
Yeah.
And I struggle with this, and I'm trying to explore how to do it myself, which is how do you tell the truth, which especially at the margin where you're talking about something that is going to be offensive, but is true, whether it's about race or genetics or differences between men and women on average. You pick the subject, the Jews in society, whatever it might be, whatever sort of hot button. There was something called like decorum before. And maybe going further back, there was like a Victorian version of that was even more controlled, or there was like more complex order of how you would go about conducting yourself in public. And now we're in this time of, okay, we came out of like this period, this sort of Biden censorship industrial complex era of the total cancel culture insanity. You can't even say that the immune system responds to viruses and bacteria.
Really?
Right? Like natural immunity became like a censorable act, right? To say like natural immunity is weird, which therefore, so we're post that. Now we're in a time where everybody can say anything, kinda, at least in America, not in Europe, because they put you in jail. And so now it's like, well, where do you then cross the line? Should there be no line? There is no norm to look to.
That's something I've been thinking about a lot, because I've come to the same conclusion that there's no social norms to mediate interactions. And that's very dangerous, especially so with sort of Mouse Utopia, mating crisis, that if there's no shared social norms, you can't police interactions. And when you can't police interactions or develop rules, people kind of just sputter, because people need to have a social structure that tells them how to cooperate with others. And the sort of the lie of postmodernism is that everyone can do that as an individual, but then the system attacks anyone who actually tries to build a frame.
Well, and it's like this sort of maybe is a natural segue into this third. So you list sort of three components of the moment, like the Mouse Utopia, socialism, and then screen addiction.
Yeah.
And it's not, I feel like this like normless, everyone's a troll, the systems of actual algorithm are that drive all of our feeds reward that.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like a not great norm that we can both not like censorship and also be worried about.
So I'm going to drop these points in so I don't forget them. But one of the things I've been thinking about is a lot of this is like riding a horse. It's similar skills. And the second thing is I think honor culture could fill a lot of the void for this stuff. So the reason I say is riding a horse is horses are herd animals and they're not actually that responsive to stimuli itself. When you deal with a horse, they care more about the body language you do and the way you deal with something than the thing itself. And that's exactly how the internet works, where the thing you say on the internet doesn't really matter. There's no standards. It's sort of the bearing and the character you do it with. So the reason people can get away with the worst possible opinions that are just deeply evil, in my opinion, is that they're playing their group's crowd psychology well and they're following its rules. And so people on the internet care about, does this person follow the social rules of my algorithmic ghetto? The problem, though, is those become highly solipsistic and stupid. So it's all of these social groups have these highly stupid rules that no one thinks about, but it's just a herd mechanism where the way herd animals work is they care the most about the status games inside their herd. So horses, and my mom was a horse lady, they'll fight over who gets to have this little clump of land in the herd. And they all stay together in the same part of the pasture, and they'll fight and bite each other over who gets to be the first person in the herd and who gets to take this tiny clump of land. And that's what most internet disputes are about. And they cannot see past these little status games. And so the way to sort of deal, and so the internet, the worst thing is an absence of confidence, where the internet will utterly attack you. And the internet also attacks vulnerability a lot, which becomes a huge issue because vulnerability is the underlying thing behind depth. So if you're attacking vulnerability, everything becomes peripheral signaling games. And that's where we are now. And so the only way to sort of get past this is to set a frame of masculine leadership. Because once you've established the frame of masculine leadership of this is what I believe in, this is what I think are true, these are the rules I follow, and if you disagree, you can go somewhere else. Because without that, everything devolves into the sort of the status herd games.
Why is that leadership masculine?
Because fundamentally, alpha men will have trouble respecting sort of a female leader, and women often do not respect female leaders either. And so the archetypes of strong female leaders in history are by and large queens, or like Margaret Thatcher. Margaret Thatcher is the democratically elected politician who I think sort of speaks to female leadership. But the structures that hold society together have been masculine. That's corporations, that's churches, that's militaries, governments, adventurous ships. These are sort of war bands of men who congregate together under a shared goal. The organizational structure of society has to be masculine, and women can inhabit these structures sometimes as leaders. So when you have a female leader, she's inhabiting a masculine leadership structure, and there have been capable female leaders, like Queen Elizabeth I, or Catherine the Great, or Cleopatra, but they're inhabiting a masculine structure.
The person that comes to mind, who I'd love to have on the show at some point, her name is Helen. Her last name I always...
Rose?
No, she wrote about how basically...
Andrews?
Yes, Helen Andrews. And she basically says that what woke is fundamentally is the feminization of all of our institutions.
Yes.
It is because like technically, she's like, when you have 60% of college graduates becoming female and then all of these fields becoming dominated by women. It's not that there's anything wrong with women, But women have, on average, different group and social dynamics, and they favor different things. And among the things that they favor more versus less is they favor more emotion versus truth seeking, and comfort and harm reduction versus truth seeking. Truth seeking tends to get like reduced in the hierarchy of preferences. If I can save the baby, truth is not as important. If I can ease your sorrow, truth can take a back seat. So I know this stuff is like, it's easy to kind of talk about in big senses, but it seems like that's what what she's describing maps against what you're laying out more or less to a T. That it's like the structure needs to be built around merit, reality, truth-seeking, performance, efficiency. And if you have that, any person, male or female, can do that, but that structure needs to be there. And if it's like small p politics and feelings, well, then you're going to have, there's almost no good way out of that.
Men are like iron and women are like water. You need to use the iron so the water can flow. If you don't have the iron, the water is going to flow inchoately. And so in a healthy society, you have the masculine institutions of this is where we channel social interactions through these standards. And so in traditional European society, you had the nobility, the church, and then the merchant classes having these structures that social interactions flowed through. But if you remove those structures, it's sort of just all chaos, where women's sort of empathetic, agreeable urge naturally leads to chaos, and it works if there's a framework to accept it. And if it doesn't, everything just becomes discordant.
So this is actually a perfect example of the kind of issue that we are now in uncharted waters for how to talk about and have it not just kind of get lumped in with like the worst examples of Andrew Tate type stuff, because he will say things that are living squarely in this conversation, and then he'll go off into beyond. So like how do you think about in this time, how, like, what do we need to be, what should be the rules of the road for the conversation we're having about this topic? For example, to get meta, because it's when we talk about screen addiction, being terminally online, being in these ideological ghettos, you end up in like women-hating world very quickly when you start to talk about some of these on average distinctions. And we have to be able to talk about them.
Yeah.
In a way that's not just like Neanderthal.
Yes. And the way I do this is we agree to inhabit frames that we can hold for now. And over time, you evolve those frames for what the context needs. And what I mean by that, because that's a very abstract way of seeing something very concrete, is we start by agreeing to basic things, because I have a visualization in mind. This is my core. These are the things I know for certain. And then you have differing levels of certainty to raw chaos. And so once I map my frame of life of this is my core, these are the things I know, these are the things I don't know, is we can start with obvious designations and then agree to that and then gradually build rules over time. But you have to be intentional about it. And you have to sort of say, this is the frame we're operating under. This is the consensus. If we can agree to this as the first step, then we can agree to something as the next step. And you do it over time, where if you say that every society in human history is a patriarchy, that would be historically true. But then the question is, what is the next extrapolation from that? We can start from a true statement, sort of organically develop ideas from that, because I think thinking needs to be organic and occur over time and occur through sort of channels that make sense to people. As of now, we're just making up the rules of social interactions, and we do something very cruel, that we don't have a social code, and we say that there are no social rules, and then we penalize people for getting the rules wrong, which is the majority of internet discourse. Yeah. Most internet discourse is like, this is a dating issue, this is a social issue. We're not going to tell you the rules. We live in a postmodern society where everyone writes their own rules.
Or they're identity-based, which means there's no rules.
Exactly. But then the hidden joke and the hidden clause inside postmodernism is you can just tell if everyone's truth is relative and every argument is good as any other, okay, if any argument is as good as any other, that means your argument is invalid compared to mine, so I can just ignore you. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I want to get into the honor culture thing because I think that's valuable, where I am of Celtic ancestry, or Ireland, Scotland, north of England, and I'm also from Pennsylvania, which Philly does have a certain variety of honor culture, and then the countryside around it does in different ways. And so it was something.
It just doesn't happen after an Eagles game.
Yeah. No, I mean.
Or maybe that's a version of it that I'm not understanding.
Honor culture is still there. It's just if you insult the Eagles, you've insulted Philly's honor. And so you get punched in the face.
I'm thinking more like the Eagles win and there's a riot.
Fair. Yeah, fair. That's like it's like a feasting day after a tribal victory.
Okay, fair.
So I was my parents told me that honor was the only thing that mattered in life. And it was the number one priority. And that was the thing I kept in sort of the back of my mind until I started going around the country and I started realizing how many other different ways there are to live. But
what is honor? What does that mean?
Honor is the ability to hold on to moral standards even if they cost you. And the sort of locus of your honor is your sort of sense of self in honor, and then that extrapolates outwards from you. So there's national honor, there's family honor, there's your personal honor. And so I find for a lot of sort of West Europeans who aren't from honor cultures, they don't have a pre-established framework for boundaries where you're like, I'm going to give more to other people and I'm going to let people walk all over me because that's sort of the nice Christian thing to do. That's not actually what Christianity says. Christianity doesn't tell you to be a cuck or to like let people walk over you.
No.
But then they sort of translate that logic. But in an honor culture, as an example, if someone messes with you, that's a slight on your personal honor and it's an insult to your family line. And so you have a moral framework that's quite complex that can operate with the death of God. Because beforehand, we had a social structure where everyone believed in God, or at least said they did. And so that constructed the framework. We're now in a society where you can't point at the Bible and then point at someone and say, you should do the thing in the Bible. The thing with honor codes, though, is they're not reliant on belief in God. They're reliant on belief in yourself. And so there's no sort of theology needed for them, but it's a pre-established framework on how to handle disputes and how to sort of maintain your own boundaries.
I'm thinking about that. I'm thinking about like the root. So there's these kind of things. There's these things we call traditions, right?
Yeah.
That it's not clear where they started or why, and you can tell like just so stories about, well, they evolved because we're groupish, and so in order to have a group and live in a group, we can blah 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 blah. Insert
height.
Yeah, insert that. But it does seem like you do need some really potent kind of moral North Star to have anything like a culture like cohere over time, because you just like, oh, you've got this thing that you do and then it becomes a habit and then it becomes sort of a ritual, but then kids rebel against it and then 2 generations later it's all been turned into trash.
Yeah.
So how does, this notion of like this honor code or honor culture that isn't ultimately sort of rooted in faith, I guess I'm skeptical of that. Are there historical examples of like these, are there just like pagan honor things like the Vikings that you're talking about? Is this like a Northern Viking deal?
Yeah. It's also across cultures. So Europe's original cultures were honor-based. Vikings, Celts. It stems back to the original Aryans 4,000 years ago in Ukraine. But the Romans had an honor culture too. When Carthage attacked Rome, their honor was insulted, so they crushed Carthage. A Roman gentleman was required to do all of these things for both the honor of his family and of Rome. So this was a European thing. You see it in Native American peoples, Afghans. It's a warrior culture thing that stems from unpredictable environments. And so it's biggest in America in the South because the English nobility who helped make the American South, they had an honor culture. World War I, was these different European honor cultures fighting each other, where Serbia insulted Austria's honor, which insulted Russia's honor, Germany.
Yeah, modern sensibilities look at that and say, how silly, King Ferdinand, we fight a world war because of like the assassination of King Ferdinand? What a ridiculous thing to do. But, right?
Am I supposed to justify that opinion? Or I just push back against it?
Well, no, I mean, when we hear, I think when modern ears hear honor in that way, being something that can motivate war, it sounds wrong. It sounds anachronistic.
That's because they're already consumed by nihilism. Where I've tried to disentangle myself from the internet, and as I've done that, it's strange because I get memories back from before I was internet addicted. Where as I spend less time online, I'm like, wait, these were memories from my childhood. This was like I used to love running around in the forest, and I remember going out to the creek and the way the world was in like 2005 Pennsylvania. Because as I disconnect from the internet, I realized that my internal monologue was connected to the internet. And so the attitude I had as I did it is I thought, wait, I'm missing out on this, but I don't want any of the things I'm missing out on. And so when you're dealing with these people who say that like honor starts wars, these are people who are already so deeply nihilistic and degenerate that they are actively happy that their civilization is dying. And why would I listen to these people? And we've hit a threshold where I am willing to totally throw out the woke paradigm and sort of the John Oliver SNL America.
No, it has nothing of value to offer.
And so
I agree with that in totality. It has literally nothing. It is like basically a satanic death cult.
I'm laughing because it's true.
I struggle with this because in one sense, which is like there's a part of me that is temperamentally inclined to try to be reasonable, whatever that means. And there's a part of me that's deeply self-righteous and wants to see clearly what is good and what is wrong and what is bad. And the Marxist death cult just is evil. And it's like, you just read it. You just read it. Just read what these people say, read their history, go all the way back, see the threads, go to their text. It's demonic.
So
it goes back to like Marx mocking people in the back of church. He's scum. He was scum from top to literally bottom, boil-covered bottom. So what am I going to get from that guy? Nothing.
And so the reason I'm bringing up honor is you're looking at the events in the modern Western world, and you can rationalize why it's okay from like a purely Christian perspective, or you can pretend to. It's not actually okay from a Christian perspective, but you could rationalize to yourself why it would be. Because we're giving to the poor, we're helping people, we're spreading love. You can't from an honor culture. From an honor culture's perspective, we are basically having our society get actively ravaged and we're too weak to stand up. And that doesn't require a theology because it's a biological reaction. And they've tested people from honor cultures versus non-honor cultures, where people from honor cultures, they hear an insult, it's literally a biological reaction of hatred, which people from non-honor cultures don't have. And so if you're looking at, it's just we're constantly actively being screwed over. And we don't need a rationalistic, legalistic definition for why this is bad. It just fundamentally is a violation. And so if you sort of get into these arguments of, oh my God, can you make a legalistic justification for why we should fight back against the destruction of our society? The honor culture answer would be, this is a rationalization for your own weakness. You are making up justifications demanding to not look at this fundamental issue.
Give me an example of the destruction. Be very specific. When you say destruction, it's very easy to say destruction of the society. What are we talking? Give me just one example that's big and real.
Failure of school system, failure of legal system, importing of mass immigrants to take America's jobs, no sort of understanding for how deindustrialization or AI gets at the economy, the mating crisis, the left seizure of academia, the left seizure of the corporations. A better question to ask would be, what institutions still work? because we are facing a sustained cultural attack on every single front that we do not have the immunological response to. And the difference in why, if these things happened in America in 1890, and we would immediately see what's going on and hate it, is that we lost that honor culture due to World War I. Because the variables that motivated Europe's sort of conquest of the world and freedom, these are honor culture variables. The final word, I believe, of the Declaration of Independence is our sacred honor, where the founding fathers were saying that they were defending America's sacred honor, because when the British were trying to force us to pay taxes without legal representation, that was an attack on the honors given to native-born English people. The core of the American Revolution was the King of England was violating the natural rights and honors given to a native-born Englishman.
I'm processing that. That's really interesting. It seems like one thing that's part of this is honor is acting in accordance with an identity,
yes,
that is solid. So it's like if you are a husband and someone says something about your wife or does something to your wife, that relationship is a fundamental part of your identity, and your role in that relationship is a fundamental part of your identity. And like, so just like really personal, we were watching, again, like to reference like bedtime TV watching, we're watching the Landman, and there's a scene in it where the son's fiance, who's this pretty Mexican girl, is like being assaulted in the back alley, and he comes out, catches the guy before he's beat her up, but he hasn't, he grabs him, flips him, and then punches him 17 times in the face, ultimately leading to his death. And this actually prompted a conversation with my wife in which I'm like, yep, I'm glad he murdered that guy. That's good. I can't not imagine I would have done the same thing in that alley if that was happening to you. And she was being very Christian and saying, well, Jesus wouldn't want that for you to do that. Like, that's not proportional to murder him for that assault. And I couldn't get past the visceral feeling that no, it is right and just.
So
it is right and just that if you assault a woman like that, you should be put through a wood chipper.
yeah.
Like, I can't. Is that the honor DNA? It's like even like morally, I'm like, I know I'm supposed to. I think I know that I'm supposed to. I'm not sure. I'm gonna have to go back and look and see, like, what would Jesus think if I just beat that guy's head into oblivion? Because that's what I really feel like I would need to do.
Yeah, I have two points here. The first is both of them relate to Christianity. The first of which is I've defended Christianity a lot in my discussions lately, where people say that communism is an outcome from Christianity.
No.
And what I say is, if you want to look at this from a sort of responsibility perspective, Christianity existed, it formed a theology. Marxism is in many ways a child of Christianity. A lot of its assumptions only make sense through a Christian frame. But it's a child who totally spurned its parent, and its entire moral code is based off an invalidation of Christianity. And so what you have there is, if you do not follow literally anything in the Bible, and if you throw out the entire Bible, then you can't blame the Bible for that. It's just because you have to divide the world into who's responsible for what. And you can't hold Jesus and the church fathers accountable for this weird death cult that emerged 2,000 years later. And I said,
Agreed.
If you're not following any of Christian morality and you reject Christianity, then you should not blame Christians for that. And what I said is, when a lot of people blame Christianity for the rise of socialism, what I tell them is, it's like you're judging, first of all, the Mad Max timeline, where if you look at Mad Max, after a nuclear war, the Australian desert produces all of these weird cultures that are sort of descended from the earlier ones. And the Industrial Revolution was comparable, where it was a sort of a cultural nuclear war. And anything that made it through the Industrial Revolution's nuclear war filter of wealth and industry is like a really warped version of what was at the start. And so whenever people sort of blame Christianity for the rise of socialism or wokeism, what I say is, if you factor out the word Christianity and put in socialism, the argument actually fits. Where if you say socialism's tenets are blank, and I read a really brilliant author named Uspensky who said, the way to understand Christianity is to realize it's actually about God. It's not an ethical moral code. It's not a rationalistically built philosophy. It is actually about attaining the kingdom of heaven. And he said, when you read these church figures, you have to not analyze it rationally, but think it's actually a spiritual path to reach God. And so when you try to apply Christianity in a non-religious framework, it gets weird. And so one of the things Uspensky said as well is he interprets it as these Christian teachings are for other Christians to build the community in imitation of the kingdom of heaven. But if you're getting attacked and destroyed by people who don't have your value system, you should not turn the other cheek.
Yeah, there's it's like the Crusades and the fact of the Crusades, the actual facts, not the fake facts that we're all taught in school because we're taught by a bunch of like low IQ Marxists. But the actual facts of the Crusades is you have North Africa, Syria, Lebanon, that entire region being actually like the hub of Christendom. Egypt is Christian. They're all Christian. And then along comes warlords conquering by the sword for, in the name of Muhammad. And in fact, when Muhammad dies, then you have to have this apostasy thing because all the people they conquered and converted were immediately like, oh, good, he's dead. I can go back to being Christian. And then the next wave of people like, no, we'll kill you. So you got to not do that. So you have militarism for its own sake as a sort of like hybrid ideology making its way on its way to conquer Europe. And the church saves Europe. And in the alt timeline, without the Crusades, there is no West, there is no modernity, there's none of that stuff. There's just like it's all Muslim. So I can't imagine a conception of like what's the proper way to be Christian in the real physical fallen world that doesn't say, yeah, actually you need the Crusades to push back on the people that want to kill all the Christians. Like you can't just turn over and let the people that want to kill all the Christians die.
I mean, nowhere in the Bible does it say thou shalt be a cuck. I mean, that's the core of my message.
It says there's thou shalt not kill, but there's other stuff.
But it's not that stuff. Thou shalt not murder. Murder is a legally incorrect killing.
Yes.
Deaths in war or whatever. And one of the things I tell myself is I had ancestors who murdered entire villages and did horrible things, and they went to church and they forgave themselves. And I thought, if my ancestors living in the 12th century could burn an entire village, I can forgive myself, or I can have God forgive me for whatever minor transgression I do this week. And because when you see the scale, you're like, I can chill. And I mean, we are also judging the entirety of human history by a failed ideology that just survives in the weird place we're in. We're judging all of human history by Mouse Utopia. And when I look at the Crusades, I'm comparing it to the medieval world, where it's constant warfare. I was reading this history of medieval Poland, and they went through every single German invasion in the 12th century. In nearly every single year, there was a German invasion of Poland. And so I don't view the Crusades, I view the Crusades as the medieval society doing a conquest. And they've been fighting the Muslims for centuries. This is a reciprocal thing. And you can't like get rid of war. You can't get rid of plague. You can't get rid of suffering. We live in a fallen world. And this is why I say you have to see Christianity as a religion, not an ethical ideology, because their goal was to reach heaven as individuals. They were not on the social engineering sort of bent that we are. So their idea is there is war. If I have to choose between murdering fellow Catholics over this plot of dirt in northern France or going on an adventure and killing Muslims, the latter is like a more elevated version of war, and my entire society has trained me to wage war as my one job, so I'm here. And so a disconnect non-religious people have to religious people is, and I want to make a video explaining sort of the logic behind this, is that religious people accept that life is sort of flawed and boring. So let's make the flawed and boring elements as sacred as possible so my life can be sacred. And so people will be like, oh, it's just sex, which is true on a biological level. But once you're adding in the institution of marriage or the society or whatever, is you've transmuted what is basically just a biological material act into something which is in service of something higher, like the society or God or the family. And so a lot of religion is taking these base sort of unpleasant human acts and then giving them a sort of label and direction that feeds together into a cohesive worldview that everyone in the society can partake in and also elevates the individual.
I want to come back to the screen addiction. So I'm just saying that to put a marker in my mind, not to forget. But what we're talking about right now feeds into something philosophical that I think is I wanted to talk to you about, which is last time we hung out together and talked and even off camera, I think I certainly would consider myself fundamentally in the thread of classical liberalism.
Yeah.
As it is generally understood among conservatives. You know, like I increasingly think of that as fundamental. My political ideology is just being Americanism, like the institutions, the ideas of the founding that say the individual is free and has sovereignty that's God-given, that the government is really basically a monster that should only be properly understood to the extent we have one at all to protect that first thing. And the Bill of Rights is all the things government can't touch so that first thing, the individual sovereignty, can be as robust as possible. So like that's like peak what would you call classical liberalism, like the British Enlightenment, the John Locke, Montesquieu, all this stuff. I have a lot of friends in this space. You sort of offhanded mentioned one group, sort of the boomer cons. I have a lot of friends that would probably fall into that category. It feels like at the intellectual level, these things are starting to break, or they're starting to not have the purchasing power that they used to have among the people that they should. Not like everybody. Most people are going about their normal lives not worrying about this shit. But for those of us that are interested in the world of ideas, you know, there was a time where it was like, the time we're in now, especially here, right now, January 2026, it's like, what does it mean to be a classical liberal now in a world where the West is committing suicide along every dimension? And where, for me, and I know I'm monologuing here, so excuse it.
It's your show.
I do it. I know. I do it.
Run it how you'd like.
but there's a thing that I'm curious. There's a thing that is I just observe, which is like I used to really like Steven Pinker. Now I think he's kind of a tool. And I say that with reservation because it's kind of being mean, and I respect his prior work, but like he is part of this like fake decorum. I really care more about being seen as being legitimate among like left of center people that have allowed the world to be destroyed. And I'm just not on that team anymore.
Yeah.
And I don't know where that puts me now, because I don't think my values have changed very much. I don't know if it's aesthetic, but I think a lot of us feel this way. Like okay, that like weak, I want to be seen as legitimate at a Georgetown dinner party or some, I don't know what. It's just like, no.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought him up because I use Steven Pinker for different reasons. He's interesting to me. I've read like 2 of his books. I didn't finish either of them. Where he and I agree on all of the things he's written books about. I agree the Enlightenment did a lot of really positive stuff. I agree the blank slate was a lie. I agree that language changes how people think. but everything he writes is in establishment of the old regime. And that's something I find disturbing, where I can read the book and agree with him, but it's sort of like looking at a weird sort of mirror where he's agreeing from the lens of the regime, and he never says anything that's against the regime. And one of my friends has a term called a pinkerism, and a pinkerism is the collapse of American society is okay because there are more toilets in Africa, which meant line went up equal world gooder.
There's a very specific version of this that that's sort of navel gazing.
Yeah.
Which is recent. He was an early part of this group of people, like sort of loosely associated with the University of Austin, which is, we're here in Austin. I know the U of Austin people well from all sides. There's been a little bit of a schism there. And he has like actively gone out of his way to call out University of Austin for daring to like be conservative-ish. Like it's just beyond the pale that you could, for example, say you're for the pursuit of truth and also say that you don't want any of your professors to be avowed Marxist activists.
Yeah.
Which to me doesn't seem like in conflict, because Marxist activists believe in bull. So if you want to convince your students to believe lies, well, that's not the pursuit of truth. But he felt it necessary, and I'm picking on him, but he's an archetype. He felt it necessary to punch down at one of the few startup universities in this country while he's at Harvard.
Yeah.
Because they dared to do something that could, and I think this is really what's going on, that could leave the stain of being called right-wing on him.
I know exactly what you're saying. And the way I think of it is that there's the rationalist community, and they're adjacent to tech, and they use a Harry Potter fanfic as their Bible. You know what I'm talking about?
Elaborate. The Harry Potter fanfic. I need to hear this one fully explained.
Harry Potter and the Rules of Rationality. And so they go through Harry Potter and they explain how to apply rationality to every part of your life, how to be rational about just different situations in your life, how to wake up in the morning, and
how to do utility maximization.
And that sounds smart if you're on like a highly specific tier of consciousness that almost no one in history has been in. Because if you have more wisdom, you realize I'm an animal. Like, imagine if you did this to a dog. It would just be stupid. And we're the same biological function as a dog, but we have more prefrontal cortex and societal planning.
Well, it's always been weird to be like, if you're going to be rational, isn't it rational to treat the human being for what it is?
Yeah, and the other thing that these people is they always apply rationality incorrectly. For example, they believe in equality. Equality is not rational. Equality is not defended by any scientific thing. It's a faith-based thing from the left. They believe in progress. Progress is not rational. And they're stuck in this sort of French Revolution Reddit atheism that has been continually disproven. And these people have stuck with opinions that seemed smart in the Enlightenment. Time of Voltaire, and they have continually failed. And so if you want to sort of use rationality as your only God and your only idol, and you have nothing else, it's just a very useful diorama of your delusions, because you're not grounding it in anything. You're not grounding it in human nature or values or history. So you're just making a very elaborate logical game that doesn't have a reflection in the world. And that's what these people do. They're very good at making these games, but the games have no relation to reality. I was reading, so Steven Pinker was going through in his book Enlightenment Now, he makes very valid claims saying that hundreds of millions of people's lives have been saved from modern medicine, which I think is completely valid. Or You'll say people aren't living in poverty, but then you'll say from these mental health stats, people are happier due to these modernist things. I'm like, cool, the statistic says that. That is not the reality. People are not happier. Or he'll say there was this reduction in quality of life for working class and middle class Americans, but this was an acceptable loss for progress. He writes that in the book.
For the god of progress.
Yeah.
What is progress from their view? Steelman, the definition of progress that you think he's using.
Progress is increase in standardization, comfort, equality, and sort of progress in their book is the removal of the spiritual and the biological. So if you split,
So the move towards the singularity,
basically, where progress to them is, you've seen the images of McDonald's in the 80s and the 90s versus today.
I'm not sure. What's the difference?
It went viral where McDonald's used to, I don't know, I wouldn't have been there at the time.
I mean, I remember it quite well.
They used to have like interesting decorations and bright colors and like places for children to play.
Here's one thing I will say. I remember that, was this McDonald's? I think it was. Was the big purple guy at McDonald's?
Barney?
No, it was like this weird purple creature guy that sort of looked like a giant, I don't know what he was. But I remember in one of them, maybe it was Burger King, the kids section had a plaything that was a metal cage on giant springs with two metal bars in the middle to hold. So you could do like this. And I remember getting stuck in it and having my head bang back and forth between the metal bars. And this was just this was the playgrounds of the time. So anyway.
Yeah.
More interesting.
I mean, your generation grew up better than my generation.
Yeah, we had stuff. We had dangerous stuff at the play gyms at McDonald's.
Yeah.
I might have taken us off the track of this meme, but
so it's, and then the modern McDonald's is just glass and steel. It's the same thing as car design.
It's all Bauhaus, modern minimalism, no character.
Everything is beige gray. Sorry, beige. Everything is beige.
No, well, everything's this, right? I mean, I love Apple, but it's, how do you get down to there almost being almost styleless, invisible, a single sheet of glass?
Yes, and by and large, their definition of progress is sterile. It's no place for humans or for children or for sort of an inner monologue. I like to say modernity is the alliance of the hysterical feminine and the autistic masculine. And the hysterical feminine sets the emotional tone and the autistic masculine enforces it.
Or maybe the masculine feminine. You take some of these, you look at every one of these activist movements today and who is in the front of the street. It's not even men anymore. It's just, it's like majority screaming activist women in the crowds everywhere, including right now in Minneapolis, everywhere you look.
Often older whites too.
Yeah, the older ones, the wanting to relive the 60s boomers. As we sit here, a video is being edited. It'll go live today where I mock one of these people because it's so heinous. An older woman, clearly, probably, it looks like she's in her either late 60s or 70s, telling a young pro-life girl that she should be raped so she would feel the trauma of abortion or something. What? And it is just like, you really have become like the true cartoon villain of a 1960s feminist. Yeah. It's like absolutely, like it's like, what have you become? Like, look in the mirror. Like, take a deep breath. Can you imagine doing that? Can you imagine being outside and yelling at a strange young woman as an older woman, wishing violence against her to make your political point about killing babies? It's so crazy.
Often, I have come to believe in the existence of good more so because some people so obviously accept their position as villains that there must be the converse. You find a lot of just evil people where they just sort of get off on it, and they've sort of at least subconsciously accepted that I am the villain of this story, and they glory in that. And that's the thing that people actually do. So we have in this, to continue using Steven Pinker as our punching bag for a kind of denatured Enlightenment rationality. There's something that's wrong with that. Yeah.
I have friends, people I consider pretty good friends, who are like that, and like people I've really looked up to, like Matt Ridley, rational optimist, kind of in the same boat, same camp. I think stylistically, I prefer him. He's got more guts.
Yeah.
He's not afraid to have someone dare to call him a right winger. But is it all really is the problem fundamentally just that you either are in Team God or you're not? And if you're not, you're maybe, if you can maybe get along with Team God and be kind of like a free riding autistic atheist, but otherwise you're probably in league with the bad guys. If not, like come on, autistic atheist friends, you can be in the arc, but just understand that you only get to live a good life because like Team God built the world that we have.
Yeah, I conceptualize it if do you believe in the soul? That's my test. If you believe in the soul, then you think human life has an innate dignity to it, irrespective of the sort of material things you shove into it. Because once you remove the soul, it's suddenly acceptable to rationalize the worst things. And the issue with these people is they don't have any framework besides group approval. But they're not honest about that. If they were honest about group approval, we would be Asia, a society like Korea or Japan, where there's these established traditions. You defer to your boss. Everyone does the ritual together to sort of maintain the group spirit. But these people are totally motivated by group conformity, but they're not honest about it. They're saying that they're rational individuals who are coming out of all of these choices due to intelligence. And that creates a profound discordance where none of the things they believe are actually rational. And for me, I've totally erased the barrier in my mind between science and religion. For me, I've basically reverted back to a 17th century worldview where we're doing science inside a world that God made. And so as you do the acts of science, you are furthering the goal of sort of developing consciousness. Because inside the world are sort of clues about how other things in the world works. That's where I am. And once you remove the sort of framework given by the divine, there's no way to pick goals. So it's all a cosmic, at the bottom of them is entirely a cosmic joke of none of this matters. If nothing matters,
it's all deterministic. In fact,
Yes.
it's all just sort of the mathematical game of life in which our consciousness is just a prior causal thing.
Yeah.
Because at some point, somehow this machine got started. Never mind how it got started, because the whole beginning thing we can't understand. But let's just pretend it got started through some random quantum bubble machine, and we're in the one universe that's dialed in for life. But there was a bunch of multiverse didn't cause life or something, and now we're here, but my thoughts in an MR, I can scan my brain and prove that free will doesn't exist because of some measurement error or something or other thing. It's like it's Sam Harris land. We're in Sam Harris land.
Yeah. And what I found is they've made sort of an imitation of reality, and they made sort of like a game of this is sort of, it's like a paper diorama of reality, but none of it actually adjusts to the real conditions. So they make the rational theories, then they don't check if they're accurate, and they bulldoze over real realities. And this is really obvious in my chosen field of anthropology, where you'll often notice very stark anthropological differences between groups that people just paper over and say don't exist. And I'll use non-controversial examples to justify this, where the differences between white Americans are quite significant culturally, whether by subregion of the country, ethnicity, social class. But the current ideology is that none of those differences matter. So if you push against people's conformity bias, they'll say, oh, we're all Americans. Oh, we're all progress. So they're not even processing, like, these are the difference between a Californian and a Texan, a Scottish American versus a Polish American.
A WASP versus an Italian or an Irish, for that matter. Yeah. Well, it cuts in both ways. You've got, okay. There's two ethics that are running alongside this conversation which is, if you believe that there is a soul, as we both do, and if you accept essentially like the Christian idea, which is fundamentally a metaphysical assertion, it is a religious claim, it is not materialistic, that we all have some kind of equal something that's metaphysical, an equal value, an equal dignity, an equal worth of some kind. That is in tension with the material not equality. And then where do we use this moral, metaphysical equality? Where does that inform the material world, where there's smarter, stronger, better people? There's smarter, stronger, better cultures. There's people that should win. There's people that should rule because they're better. And there's people who should follow because they can't possibly lead or make decisions under pressure and don't want to and will take the cowardly route and leave everyone worse off if they're put in that position. You see what I'm getting at? Like, how do we... I think classical liberalism maybe overplayed the equality factor, the human equality assertion. Maybe. But if we dispense with that and just leave it in some like, I believe this, but otherwise I'm in the Machiavellian world of might makes right, and there's no other thing to gate my behavior, I'm not sure that world's better. That seems like a worse world.
This is why I say that you have to differentiate in Christianity and socialism and see Christianity as being about God, not an ethical code, because this was not an issue of discussion until the rise of socialism, where 300 years ago, 400 years ago, people would say Christianity is for your soul, and the actual society is this brutal Darwinistic jungle, that the church is sort of like a recharge point for when you can't stand the brutal Darwinistic jungle. And everyone took that for granted. So these ideas of like these ideas of equality simply did not exist before the French Revolution. They were ported over from sort of certain like utopian messianic Christian religious cults. But
I'm not well read enough in the philosophy of the history of like the Catholic Church.
The Protestants were the ones who were really guilty of that.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like though. Do you reject sort of the thesis of like Tom Holland? Did you read Dominion?
I read that. Yeah.
What did you think of that book? Because he basically argues that America, let's say, the American Enlightenment legal ideas that have equality at their center and have individual liberty at the center, equality in liberty at the center, they're rooted in Christian conceptions of equality. That like John Locke and property, that's rooted in Christian conceptions of equality.
That is true. This is why I'm talking about sort of making gradations of responsibility. Because Christianity put apart a worldview, it set its frame, and Christianity is more intentional about this than practically any other religion. It's not sort of traditions from your past, it's a written text with the rules. Then that was a project for thousands of years, and then it created different children that operated under their own principles that rejected Christianity to differing degrees. And you have to hold the children responsible for what they get from the parent. And past a certain threshold, the parent does not have custody over the children.
Yeah, it's a good analogy.
So this is why. So in our current society, you have Christianity as an operating system, and then Christianity is fighting with socialism, where socialism or communism is the frame most people inhabit for a lot of their interactions. Politics, economics, but it's a watered down version of Marxism. Mm-hmm. What you do when you balance honor culture with Christianity, kill socialism, is you've moved the moral frame from are we arguing over social suicide to people have differing levels of honor based on people. My answer to this, and I'm still a classical liberal, but I don't mean that in the way I did before, where I'm now a classical liberal in like the 17th century sense, which is you are divided in a country like America between the principles of freedom and equality, because classical liberalism creates legal equality to allow freedom of action and to allow unequal outcomes.
Yes.
You have the sort of disparity, though, between once you set out legal equality, it metastasizes into a sort of folk religion that consumes all of the elements of society, if that makes sense.
Well, this is the feedback. The really simple way to sort of say that is it Moynihan that said, conservatives are right that culture matters and liberals are right, that politics impacts culture, something like that. That there's a
Yes.
feedback loop there that once you assert something, I mean, I believe that the proper legal regime would be the abolition of all prohibition for drugs. Even though I think I don't take drugs, I don't even drink alcohol anymore, honestly. But it's just, why should the state tell you what you can't put in your body? And when it tries, it always sucks, and people do it anyway, and it's just black markets, and it's terrible. So that's a divergent thing. That's saying, hey, what is legal isn't always good.
Yeah.
And so I can say to my children and to myself, drugs are bad. They'll wreck your life. Don't do them. Pay no attention to all these people that love their psychedelics. That's a bunch of gobbledygook. Just live a clean life. You'll be happier. But they should be legal. And so long as you don't do anything else and you're just like getting high in your backyard, I don't care.
Yeah.
But then in reality, perhaps it's just more complicated, because if it's legal, it starts to take on the tincture of being good because it's legal.
The thing with the government is, the government, when it interferes in society, it takes away responsibility from a certain thing, so the society doesn't have to deal with it. So if drugs were legal, then, and this is a whole other different thing where, for example, if you removed welfare, poor people in non-welfare societies develop communities of mutual support. So if one of them up, another of their buddies will help them out.
The Mormons are actually a really good case study in this in the United States.
Welfare kills that.
Yes.
And so that's a huge reason why the black community has experienced collapse in nearly all of its vital statistics since the 60s.
Yeah.
Even though they've had an inflow of cash. And
there's been a good reversal. There's underlying strengths that are happening in spite of all of that horror.
yes.
But yeah. Welfare is evil.
And so we have tried to kill culture and then use the government and the bureaucracy to fulfill all of these things that culture used to fulfill, but they can't, because culture is innately human. And part of the reason why we have an atomization, a mating, a societal crisis is the culture is atrophied so much. You don't generate social norms to mediate person-to-person interactions. And the system likes this and has furthered this, which is what the Soviet authors said, because it makes people reliant on the system and atomized. And so what pre-industrial societies did, and this was a universal, was your level of freedom and respect was equivalent to your level of responsibility. What America and a lot of sort of North European societies did is they made systems where every adult male had to be responsible for their own outcomes. And this is what generated the West's success, because rather than these clan societies where everyone's mooching off everyone else and building these networks, when every individual is forced to be responsible for themselves, they have to develop an emergent order of cooperating with other people for their mutual benefit. And it makes the society very stress resistant to the environment. And so that's why individualism was so powerful. And so the reason that America—
It's poorly named, actually, because it's really voluntarism.
Yes.
It's not individualism as in like a celebration of the individual as a unit in some metaphysical sense is not what it is. It's a society. It's a civil society that respects the individual.
I have a lengthy rant about individualism that speaks to the point you're saying, but what I'd say is we need to have a social structure where adults are held responsible for their own actions, and if you are responsible, you can be free. And so the reason America had a universal suffrage democracy in the 19th century was that practically all white male Americans were property owners, literate, and they were responsible members of society who had to understand how the world worked enough to sort of put food on the table. And so if you look at other societies like France, the reason that France had an issue going to democracy is most people in France were peasants tied to the land under in this feudal structure. Mm-hmm. And so
fundamentally aristocratic society.
Yes. And so the aristocrats had experience with wielding power and responsibility in a way that a small-holding American farmer would. But then what the aristocracy had done is sort of strip a lot of the lower levels of agency. So when they got power, they pushed socialism like the French Revolution. And socialism is fundamentally people with low agency trying to sort of seize more power. But individualism...
Low agency, high schooling.
Yes, exactly. And so to speak to your point on individualism, there's this whole debate about if America in the West has become more or less individualistic. And I also have a gripe with the word individualism because it hides a distinction between freedom from yourself or freedom from the society and the government. Because 19th century and classical liberalism is freedom from external oppression, from a government intervention. You have as many legal freedoms as possible.
Yeah.
But inside that freedom is a series of societal constraints. You have to follow the moral code. You have to support your family, give to your society. And then what happened in the 20th century was you saw the constraining of agency, and then freedom in that term meant something completely different and incorrect, where you're free to have an abortion, you're free to get government subsidies, you're free to not be held accountable for your own actions.
You're free to pursue your emotional goals at other people's expense.
Yes, exactly.
You're free to not experience pain or anxiety, even if that means other people can't speak because their speech might make you upset.
Exactly. And so they've warped the term freedom into something it just is not. These are not accurate assessments. And this is the divide at the heart of liberalism between equality and freedom, where the ideology of the French Revolution and the American Revolution are both called liberal, but they're very different things. The French Revolution evolved into the modern American left and ultimately communism and those things.
Yeah.
And I am a classical liberal in the vein of what the founding fathers pulled from. And that version of classical liberalism stems back to the European aristocratic tradition and honor culture and freedom. And I would rather live free than die a slave. That's the current that the founding fathers were pulling from.
Yeah, I think that the set of ideas, institutions, cultural norms, decorums that we would call the rules-based international order, whatever, the sort of the Davos crowd. that I completely fundamentally agree. This is where I both disagree with the president on certain technical things and even disagree with him on the I have a weird personal feeling about the way the president interacts on the grand global stage, because I like his brutishness as a Philadelphian, like as a Jersey Philly guy. I kind of get it, so I kind of like it. I also kind of wish we had better leadership than that. I wish we were more Victorian and more statesmanly and more respectable. So I don't like it at the same time. But I think the thing that is this like Rorschach test is like, even recently, he goes overseas and he's like, you guys are wrecking your societies. You're committing cultural suicide. And no, we're not doing that. Yeah. And we're going to take Greenland. We're going to like this sort of like macho assertion push. Like it's a very transparent pushback on this like denatured gentleman's agreement of the UN age.
Yeah.
I think that that's broadly correct and good, actually, even though like what comes next might be hell. But I don't know if there's any other kind of character in our landscape that could say the kinds of things he's saying.
Yeah. It's, I think there's something valuable in what you said. And the way I'd articulate is we are operating in a position of very high uncertainty, and we're a society obsessed with normalcy that tries to hide it. So if we were honest and we said, we don't know how to do this society, we don't know how to deal with the technology, we don't know how to deal with Mouse Utopia, we don't know if the things we believe are true, that would be really good, because it would at least set a frame for a lot of people who want to know the answer to start figuring it out together. And what the sort of old order is, it's like Kronos eating his own children, where Kronos tried to eat a young Zeus because he knew that Zeus would succeed him. And And so it's the old boomer order trying to sort of eat the next thing that's developing. And the sort of online attitude that I find so distasteful, especially among the left and sort of the groypers, is any admission of something real is seen as weak. You're supposed to play these silly status games. And so if we say, look, this is a bad social situation, we can accept that it's bad, and we can be adults about trying to fix this, they will reject that out of hand because it's not looks maxing.
Or hating the Jews.
Yeah.
Blaming the Jews for the fact you can't get a date or a job.
It's ridiculous where I'll talk about these macro social issues and they'll be like, this is an incel talking point. Or they'll be like, Rudyard, you're a slave to the Jews. The top criticism of me is I like the Jews too much. No, literally. Yeah.
I'm laughing because it's just like, it's not my audience. and I'm not afraid of these people. And it's also, it's just infantile.
Because
it's just an abdication of personal responsibility. It's like, I'm sorry, this is something that I stand by, even though it will come across wrong. You can find a girl if you get your act together. You can. I'm sorry, you can. My son found a beautiful girl, and he might, who knows? I think there's a decent chance he marries her. I probably shouldn't say that on the show. It doesn't matter. I actually think that in some ways, and we should talk about this now as we kind of come to the end of whatever hour 3 or wherever we are. I think that here's my proposal. I think that the best possible outcome of the things we're in with so much converging chaos, including AI, automation, the crazy level of mass disruption that is, it only feels more inevitable the more time you spend with the technology. I think the best case scenario is we have a neo-Middle Ages.
Yeah.
In which it's new in that it's materially much better off because we don't even need the same level of division of labor and specialization because the robots know everything and can do everything. And what they can't do, and they can do it in the worst possible way, but in a real sense they can't. They can't do the one thing that we're built for, which is to love, form bonds, have kids.
Yeah.
And so if we center the basic human, biblical, biological need, finding a woman as a man, I'm going to focus on being a man, I'm a father of 2 sons. Find a woman, shares your values, make her your partner in life, make your life about that at its core, at that relationship, having kids, building family, building a legacy of reality, biology, of practice of that, and then build whatever, I don't know what the rest of it's all going to be. It's going to be tumultuous. Maybe you're on some kind of arc, but that's going to be your arc into the times that lie ahead. That's my hypothesis now. That's like the like, we're going to come maybe to a new age where our names are the thing we do, like the Smith family. And that's my hope, actually. That's like my message of hope in these uncertain times, is that the old things we cared about didn't die, actually, and it's time to recognize they're the only thing that really mattered.
I mean, Nietzsche said that the age of the last men lose, and he said the ideology that comes out of it, he calls it like heroic individualism. And his ideal was that we build the society around sort of, he calls them the creators. He calls a group called the Writing United States. He said the creators are the reaction of the last men, where their idea is sort of create generative creativity to transcend the current level you're at. And I think AI has a positive potential where the 3 outcomes I see for AI as a potential. Firstly, it gets plugged into the last man socialist order where people live off sort of welfare stipends. Yeah. The human race degenerates into being ant people. They use genetic engineering to gradually remove the edgy people. Whether that's done by an evil Marxist state or like a more Oedipal, softer socialist state. The second option...
So there's, in other words, the H.G. Wells vision of society.
Yes, exactly.
Fully realized.
Cries. The second option is that this congregates to small tech elites while the rest of the society collapses. And so it's this weird fantasy sci-fi dystopia of these hyper-advanced islands surrounded by degenerated rest of society.
So it's time machine.
Yes. I used to love H.G. Wells. He was my favorite author in high school. But the third thing as well is that we use it to enable the individual in the family. Because what AI can do, and you would structure it to reward sort of life affirmation. And what I mean by that is activities humans evolved to do so that humans can live out their own aspirations. The AI exists to model sort of humans reaching their own goals, because if the AI decides for us, it will destroy free will. The AI exists to enable free will. And so it rewards behaviors that do that. And I combine that between courage and kindness. Those are the two traits. Courage and kindness threaded by wisdom. Because courage is, if it's just kindness, it stops being kindness, it devolves into whatever the left does, suicidal sympathy. If it's just courage, then it will devolve into Nietzschean warlords enslaving people. And so you need to balance them, but use wisdom to articulate which to pick at a certain time. But then the AI can remove stuff like bureaucracy, or it can do a lot of the back end stuff. So if you're a family business, it can radically enable that, because the AI does all the things that would have required a handful of either like people for the legal bureaucracy, or for like, you don't have to hire out extra employees. So we could use AI to enable individual family entrepreneurialism, which is how humans have evolved for all of history. The predominant economic unit of society has always been the family. And when you destroy that, it creates these weird dystopian effects of sort of the Unabombers over socialization.
It's this fact of anonymous exchange might be one of the hardest parts of this conversation we've had underneath the surface. I think about, I have a really good friend, actually. He's this economist in Milan. Isn't that lovely?
Is he Italian?
He's Italian, of course. Alberto Mingardi. I try to get to Italy as much as I can in the past 5 years, now that I can travel a little more. And so Alberto, free market guy, I love the Keynes-Hayek rap videos. That's how we met. I asked him, I said, has there been work to try to understand why Southern Italy is poor relative to Northern Italy? Because it's weird.
I have a theory, but continue.
Well, he said there's been some different studies, and one of the premises that he thinks, again, all of these things end up being fundamentally unprovable. But one was, for cultural reasons, largely about history of dominion from outsiders, Southern Italy never developed an ability to trust outside the family. You see it in the Godfather movies, right?
Yeah.
It's like that trust the family thing, which survives into my generation even. It was very deeply embedded. And as a result, Southern Italy just didn't have the culture to create firms that could be actually engaging via contract with people who aren't in your family, which is what it takes to build a business that can achieve massive growth and scale. You don't build an auto company with just your cousin Vito. You need to actually hire people outside the family if you want to build Ferrari. And so that was his thesis. And I think that sounds right, even if it's only stylistically true. But it points to something that's interesting, which is that this is almost Marxist sounding a little. It's got the tincture of alienation, that when we have large-scale division of labor and specialization, forget even the globe. America's big enough. When you can move across the country for your job and you're disconnected from your family, as I did, and you start to you break all these thick bonds and replace them with thin ones of your colleagues that are your friends until you change jobs and then you never talk to them again. A lot of what it means to be human as we understood it up until 5 minutes ago is gone.
Yes.
And you're replaced with this, like, the first thing you ask someone when you meet them is, what do you do?
Yeah.
And that's what we've become. And that's a product of our economic conditions in a very real sense.
Yes, those are both themes anthropologists have spoken of, where there's a French term called anomie, and anomie is a sort of like cultural and spiritual atomization. And it started out in French West Africa, actually, as a side effect of European colonialism, breaking down the old clan and religious structures. The next populations that manifested anomie were Black Americans and Jews. And then from those populations, it spread out to across the world. White Americans of anomie, anomie seen in Southeast Asia. And those three populations were the people who sort of got hit by the brunt of modernity the hardest. And so anomie has been established, and it has a lot of really negative psychological effects. But secondly,
Just define enemy for me again, because I want to make sure I'm understanding the concept. Because I've heard this used in criminology actually, but
so we're so deep into anomie, it's hard to articulate, but it makes sense if you're in a highly structured clan society where every part of your life is controlled by some ritual or by the elders. And so for Jews, they had the shtetl communities in West Africa. They had the clan structures that were highly ritualistic. And for Black Americans, they were part of a plantation society. So what happens when you remove the context of this overriding social sort of order is people don't know how to interact with each other. So it's both a spiritual alienation and it's an individual group level alienation.
okay. Yeah, so you've had this way of doing and being.
Yeah.
That now you're free. You're free. And it's like, I don't know how to be free. I don't know how to, I'm miserable.
And the second thing is that I've been curious of the topic you said too, of why South Italy is poorer than North Italy. And I read a lot about it, and I only got it recently in a few books. But South Italy was under the control of exploitive sort of regimes that did stuff like tax farming or stealing people's property.
Yeah.
And they had an oppressive nobility, while North Italy was under city-state governance, like Milan or Venice or the Papal States. And in South Italy, I've read about how South Italian families tell their kids not to play with their neighbors. The neighbors aren't trusted, just people in the family.
Yeah, yeah.
And then in North Italy, trust is on a city level. So you can have luxury factories in places like Milan or Venice that make high quality goods, but the larger scale industrialization you see in Germany or America requires North European national levels of social trust, where even in North Italy, you can't amass a national level of social trust. So that's why Italians are very good at artisans and luxury goods, but not larger scale industrial processes.
That all tracks. And culturally, it's a tribal society. It's the last European state to become a single nation. They talk about themselves at the city level to this day.
Yeah.
They have city loyalty. It's really kind of an interesting remnant. It feels like that might be where we, in the healthy version of what's to come, some of that maybe comes back.
You need to develop organic bonds distinct from the state and the bureaucracy. You can either do that in the New World on a transnational level, where I've been pulled.
This is like Balaji's network state type of stuff.
And so like I've met Balaji through my YouTube channel, and he lives in Singapore. That's a great example. I have fans in Dubai, in Europe, around the world. And so we're attached together digitally, but not geographically. And then also on the local level, because we need to reintegrate locally, because the current sort of atomized digital life is just not human or healthy.
You said you've been trying to unplug from the internet. We've recently sort of instituted a no screens until sundown on Sunday, sort of modified Catholic Sabbath type thing. We're only a couple weeks into this, but it was remarkable to like, ooh, wow, I'm like horribly addicted to this. I'm horribly, horribly addicted to it.
I think we're going to close up soon, so I'm going to refrain from my entire rant. I'm going to make a video at the entire system I used to do it, because I've developed this system where one of the core pieces of logic is it's necessary to have long periods of unconstrained, undistracted time. Because if you go for hours straight without looking at your phone, you start having very different thoughts. You start processing your life on a deeper level. Your sense of time grows. Where I use app blockers, for example. If I have the slightest urge, I'll block my phone for 4 hours. It's an immediate instinctual thing I do now. And I develop little rules, like I try not to use my phone on the toilet. I try to put my phone in a different room from where I sleep, because the phone gets you because beyond a behavioral psychological level, and it often exploits liminal states. And what I mean by that is I'm done with work. I'm about to go to somewhere. I have 15 minutes to spare. I'm going to look at my phone. And that's an instinctual reaction. So every time you're supposed to be resting, instead you get stuck in this sort of psychological hyperarousal, which keeps you in a state of discordance where you never really rest. And so you're constantly getting into these feedback loops with your phone, and it gradually sucks you into it. So your phone becomes your internal monologue. So like an addiction, you have to build out distinct psychological polarities in your mind. And what I've come to find is the internet is profoundly boring. Because I do an activity where every time I open my phone and I close my phone, I think, am I happy? And if you put together in your mind, I have opened my phone hundreds of times, and 70% of the time I am not happy. Why am I doing this? And people don't put it together because they're so hooked up to the phone, they've lost the frame of comparison.
It's a new habit that we need to find ways to establish for ourselves that is really, really difficult.
Yes.
That sums it up. Any final thoughts before we wrap up this edition of Philosophical Wonderland, Rudyard Lynch?
This was a great show. You did a good job.
Well, I appreciate that. I'll always take a compliment. It was great to have you back. I hope that your unplugging is healthy and helpful for you. Because I noticed it. I noticed you hadn't posted in a while, and I was like, I hope Rudyard's all right. I hope he's not dead in a ditch somewhere. So good to see you. Good to have you back.
Thank you.
And until next time.
Sounds good.